Why did no one look up when she entered the room? Why did the air shift without anyone noticing that the smallest person in the dining facility was quietly becoming the center of a storm? The truth was simple. They never saw her. Not really. Not the way they should have. The forward operating base was alive with its usual rhythms, forks clinking, boots scuffing against old concrete, distant generators humming like a second heartbeat. The scent of powdered eggs and scorched coffee drifted in waves. Soldiers joked, complained, debated missions they hadn't even been assigned to yet. But in the far corner, where the noise thinned out just enough for the quiet to settle, Claire Donovan sat alone. She always sat alone. 5 feet of calm wrapped in a navy uniform most people overlooked. Head slightly bowed, fingers scrolling across an encrypted tablet filled with signal maps and interference charts. She didn't hunch, didn't shrink. She simply existed with a stillness that made her hard to notice unless you were searching for peace in a place that rarely offered it. Today, peace didn't last long. 3 men entered the chow hall like they owned the air in it. Their voices carried before their boots did, Maddox in front, big and loud, and wearing his confidence like armor he never bothered to polish. Reyes and Dunn flanked him, their laughter a little sharper, a little too eager, like men orbiting someone whose approval they desperately needed. Maddox spotted her instantly. Of course he did. Bullies always found the quiet ones first. He swaggered forward, a shadow swallowing the light over her tray. "Look at this," he drawled. "Chief Petty Officer Donovan, worth nothing but a laptop and a badge." Claire didn't look up, not yet. She clicked a line on her tablet, saving a frequency report. "You hear me?" Maddox leaned closer. "Hey, tech girl, seal reject. 5 foot nothing pretending to be a warrior." A few heads turned. Someone snickered into their coffee. Claire set down her fork. Then she lifted her eyes, calm, steady, unreadable. The kind of eyes that didn't rise to a challenge because they had already faced worse than the man in front of her. Maddox smirked, irritation and triumph mixing behind his teeth. He grabbed the edge of her tray and, without hesitation, slapped it off the table. Food scattered, metal clattered, conversations died mid-sentence. Claire didn't flinch. Not a blink, not a breath out of rhythm. She simply closed her tablet with slow, deliberate care, stood up, and walked out of the dining facility without a single word. No anger, no fear, no reaction. Just control. That was what unsettled Maddox. Everyone saw it, even if they didn't understand it. The quiet wasn't weakness. It wasn't submission. It was the first sign that something was deeply, dangerously different about her. Outside, the morning sunlight glared off sand-colored walls and razor wire. Claire walked with the same smooth, balanced steps she always had, light but grounded, deliberate but fluid. She didn't rush. She didn't look over her shoulder. She didn't need to. But inside her chest, behind that unmoving expression, something old stirred, something she had kept buried under silence and routine. Calm is a discipline. Calm is a skill. Calm is a shield. And she had learned it the hard way. By the time she reached the signals bay, the world had settled back into its mechanical heartbeat. Servers hummed. Screens blinked in steady frequency patterns. Radios flickered with distant voices. This was her sanctuary, the only place where noise made sense. Claire set down her tablet, logged into the system, and slipped back into the patterns she trusted. Satellite relays, drone uplinks, interference maps. She moved with surgical precision, hands steady even under the faint tremor of generators. To everyone else, she was a quiet Navy chief loaned to an Army base to make the radios work. To her, the airwaves were a battlefield, one she fought on with logic, patience, and a mind that never stopped scanning for shadows. But that morning, as she adjusted a low-gain antenna profile, she felt the shift behind her. 3 soldiers stood in the doorway, the same ones who had watched Maddox humiliate her at breakfast. They didn't speak. They just stared. And for the first time since the incident, something flickered behind their eyes. Doubt. Unease. A question they didn't know how to ask. Claire ignored them, not coldly, simply because she had nothing to prove to them. Her value wasn't earned in dining halls or hallways. Her worth didn't rise or fall based on who understood her. Besides, what could she possibly say? That she had survived training they would never even hear about. That silence was a weapon sharper than any blade. That the calm they mistook for fear was forged in places where fear got people killed. The truth stayed where she kept all her truths, quiet, folded, tucked behind controlled breathing and steady hands. Later, when she returned to her quarters, bare, clean, arranged with the precision of someone who lived in small spaces long before this, she wrote one simple line in a private log. DFAC incident. Gunny Maddox raised done. Harassment escalating recorded. That was it, no emotion, no explanation. Just fact. A quiet record for a storm she felt approaching. But the storm didn't come the way most storms do. It didn't roar. It didn't rage. It crept slowly, methodically, in shadows and blind spots, in whispered insults and staged encounters. And every time she walked away, they mistook that silence as surrender. Every time she lowered her gaze, they believed they were winning. Every time she chose restraint, they mistook it for weakness. They didn't know silence is the last warning of someone who learned how to stay alive by not giving away the battle too early. They didn't know she mapped the base like a battlefield. Every hallway, every camera blind spot, every possible route Maddox might use when he decided humiliation wasn't enough. They didn't know she checked corners like instinct, not paranoia. They didn't know the callus on her thumb didn't come from typing. They didn't know the scar beneath her sleeve wasn't from a server rack. And they didn't know the quiet that surrounded her wasn't emptiness. It was discipline. It was history. It was training they weren't qualified to imagine. By the end of the day, people had already begun to whisper. Did you see how she didn't even react? She's too calm, like she's been through worse. That wasn't normal silence. Rumors, like heat, travel quickly in confined places. But truth moves slower. Truth waits. Truth watches. And truth was already gathering in the stillness behind Claire's eyes, waiting for Maddox to make the mistake she knew he would make. A mistake that would turn a quiet woman into something the whole base would finally see clearly. A mistake that would answer the one question no one dared ask aloud. Who exactly was Chief Petty Officer Claire Donovan? And why did a man like Maddox feel the need to break someone who never raised her voice? What made her so steady when everyone else lived on a razor's edge? What was she hiding behind all that silence? And why did Maddox look more irritated, not satisfied, each time she refused to break? The answer wasn't in words, it was in the way she moved. 2 days after the dining hall incident, Claire walked down a narrow concrete hallway, tablet tucked under her arm. The corridor hummed with flickering lights, pipework groaning overhead, the familiar heartbeat of a base that never slept. She scanned signal logs with her usual calm, completely unaware, or pretending to be, that two shadows leaned against the wall ahead, waiting. Raise and done, clipboard in hand, fake errand, fake casual posture. Then Maddox stepped out from a side door like a trap snapping shut. "Chief," he said, loud enough to draw half the hall's eyes, "you sleep okay? Or do Seal rejects dream in binary?" He smirked at his own joke. Raise chuckled. Dunn tried, but it came out thin, shaky. Claire didn't react. She simply adjusted her step and walked around Maddox. One subtle angle change, one breath, one deliberate choice. The hallway echoed with their laughter. But something happened that they didn't notice. Several soldiers nearby didn't laugh. One of them shifted awkwardly, the humor draining from his face. Another stared at Maddox like he was watching something ugly, something he wanted no part of. They were cracks, hairline fractures in the performance Maddox had been staging. Claire walked away without a sound, but the silence she left behind was not the same one she carried in the dining hall. This one unsettled people. Later that night in her quarters, she opened her encrypted log again. The room was dim, tight, perfectly organized. Her handwriting was neat and controlled like everything she did. 1400 HRS, Corridor Charlie 3, Maddox raised done, obstruction and derogatory remarks, pattern escalating. She didn't add emotion, didn't assign blame, didn't speculate, she simply documented. She wasn't documenting for sympathy. She wasn't documenting to complain. She was documenting as if she expected, someday, someone would need the truth laid out cleanly, line by line. Someone did. But not yet. By the third day, the harassment changed shape again. In the operations center, Maddox made a show of dropping his gloves next to her hand. "Tell me, Chief," he said loudly, "when bullets start flying, you gonna leave the laptop and actually show up?" Someone laughed, softly, uncomfortably. Claire finished adjusting a relay frequency. "Your radios will work," she said simply. "That is all you need to know." It should have ended there, but Maddox pushed harder. "Yeah, half soldier, half software update, that what you are." Thin laughter rose around the room, not because anyone found it funny, but because laughter was safe. Laughter kept them out of the line of fire. Claire didn't look at him again. She logged the last frequency update and walked to the next console. Behind her, a young soldier watched the scene, jaw tight. He didn't defend her, but his silence wasn't approval. It was shame. That night another entry went into her log. The pattern grew clearer. Time, location, comments. And between all the lines she wrote, she was also mapping something else. Blind spots. She reviewed camera grids under the guise of investigating interference near the motor pool. She didn't steal access. She already had it. The digital warfare suite she ran gave her more visibility than Maddox could imagine. Every corridor he blocked her in. Every angle he tried to trap her from. Every corner where someone could be pulled without a camera catching it. She didn't avoid those places. She simply studied them, prepared for them, accepted them as a certainty. Because Maddox wasn't escalating toward a confrontation. He was escalating toward a mistake. And she wanted to meet that mistake on her terms. Rumors started shifting, too. The base had a way of noticing things without admitting it. A corporal in the comms bay bumped into Claire too hard one day. Anyone else would have jerked, stepped back, apologized. Claire simply pivoted, fluid, instinctive, letting the collision slide past her like water slipping around a stone. The movement was too smooth, too practiced. A technician noticed the callus on her thumb, angled thick, not from typing or equipment, more like from years of drawing a blade from a sheath, a dive knife if he had to guess. He didn't ask her about it. No one ever asked her about anything. Because there was something in her silence that made curiosity feel intrusive. Then came the night at the combat dive facility. Claire always swam at dawn when the pool was quiet, but one night she arrived after lights out, the training complex bathed in dim red glow. A single staff sergeant was on watch, half awake, scrolling through his phone. He barely glanced up when she slipped into the water. But when he checked a second time, she was gone. 3 feet deep, 6'10". She was at the bottom, legs folded beneath her in a still cross-legged pose, bubbles rising slow and steady. A rebreather beside her, eyes open, motionless. 1 minute passed. 2, 3, 4. The sergeant put down his coffee. 5, 6. When she finally rose, she didn't gasp for air, didn't heave, didn't show a single sign of effort. She surfaced like someone surfacing from memory, not water. He watched her climb out of the pool without even glancing at him. He told no one what he saw, at least not directly, but words seeped through the base sideways, the way real secrets do. Someone mentioned she checked corners like a breacher. Someone else talked about the callus on her thumb. A few whispered about her underwater stillness. None of the pieces fit. Except for Maddox. He noticed everything because he needed a reaction to feel powerful, and Claire gave him none, not a single crack, not even a flicker. When he heard the rumor about her holding breath underwater for over 6 minutes, his grin faltered for the first time, just enough for his jaw to tighten, just enough for his eyes to lose focus. He didn't laugh it off. He didn't call it a lie. He didn't say anything at all. Because for the first time, Claire Donovan wasn't just an annoyance. She was a question, an unanswered one. And some men don't fear the truth as much as they fear not knowing. That night Maddox's decision clicked into place, not with rage, but with cold calculation. If he wanted to break her silence, mockery wouldn't be enough. He needed a place without cameras, without witnesses, without escape routes. He needed a blind spot. He studied them, the same ones Claire had already memorized days earlier. And when he finally made his move, Claire was already waiting for him. But not with anger, not with fear, not with defiance, with something far more dangerous. Preparation. What happens when 3 men who believe they're predators finally corner someone who never once saw herself as prey? And what if she's been waiting, not for confrontation, but for clarity? The night Maddox chose to act wasn't unusual. That's what made it perfect. Falcon Ridge slept in its restless way. The hum of generators, occasional boots on gravel, the distant rumble of a convoy preparing for an early run. But the part of the base where Claire walked was quieter, tucked behind maintenance buildings and supply crates stacked like walls. She walked with her usual precision, shoulders relaxed, steps balanced, tablet secured, not anxious, not confident, simply aware. Awareness was her real armor. Awareness and acceptance. She turned down a metal corridor she had already mapped in her mind, 10 paces long, no cameras, no escape routes except forward and back, a place most people pass through without noticing its isolation. She noticed. She chose it. Halfway down, the air shifted. Bootsteps behind her. Voices murmuring ahead. 3 silhouettes slipping into the corridor's far end. Maddox. Ray's. Dunn. They didn't hide their presence. They wanted her to feel trapped. They wanted her to react. But Claire simply exhaled through her nose, long, controlled, and came to a stop exactly where she wanted to. "Well, look who's out after curfew," Maddox said, tone dipped in false friendliness. "Chief Donovan, ghost of the Comms Bay." Ray snickered. Dunn gave a nervous grin, eyes flicking to the walls as if expecting someone to intervene. "Let me pass," Claire said softly, not timid, not pleading, just stating the next logical step. Maddox stepped closer, shoulder blocking her path. "We'll let you pass, just want a quick chat." His eyes slid over her with a smirk. "One-on-one, Mantu, well, you know." Ray's laughed. Dunn tried to. None of them noticed the slight movement Claire made with her right hand, fingers brushing beneath her blouse, just enough to activate a hidden micro body cam. A tiny vibration answered. "Recording." Maddox leaned closer. "You've been real rude lately, Chief. Too good to talk to us. Too good to show respect." Claire's face remained unreadable. "It's late." "You're right," Maddox said, grin widening. "Late's when quiet people slip. Late's when they finally show who they really." His hand shot forward. Not a grab, a shove. Hard, calculated, aimed at her shoulder so it would leave no bruise but plenty of humiliation. The heel of his palm slammed into her, driving her back into the metal wall with a clang that echoed up the corridor. For the briefest moment, Maddox expected compliance, recoil, fear, maybe even tears. Instead, he got physics. Claire didn't resist the force. She redirected it. She allowed her body to move with the impact, turning just enough to coil Maddox's momentum into her own. In one smooth pivot, she guided his wrist into a narrow gap between the bones of his forearm, a manipulation that stole leverage from him entirely. His eyes widened. What? Ray's lunged exactly as she knew he would, predictable, linear, his right arm extended for a grab. Claire stepped a single inch out of line. Her hand rose. Two fingers struck a precise nerve cluster in the notch above his collarbone. A brachial plexus stunner. No theatrics. No flourish. Just mastery. Ray's arm went limp instantly. He gasped, stumbling backward, face contorting with shock and confusion. What the hell? Dunn panicked and rushed forward, unsure whether to pull Maddox back or grab Claire. He chose both, poorly. Still controlling Maddox's wrist, Claire shifted her hip, directing his weight sideways. Maddox pitched forward, crashing directly into Dunn. The two hit the ground in a tangle of limbs and curses. 9 seconds. That's all it took. 9 seconds for 3 trained Marines to end up on the floor, breathless, disoriented, and staring up at a woman who had barely broken her posture. Claire adjusted the crease on her blouse where his shove had wrinkled it. She looked down at them, not with anger, not with triumph. Just composure. This conversation is over, she said quietly. She walked past them with the same steady pace she'd entered with. Behind her, Maddox remained on his hands and knees, not in pain but in something far sharper. Disbelief. Ray's cradled his useless arm. Dunn pressed a hand to the side of his head, dazed. Not one of them called after her. Not one of them threatened. Not one of them laughed. Because in 9 seconds, the story they'd built around her, weak, quiet, harmless, collapsed under the weight of reality. The base began whispering before dawn. 3 recon guys. 3. And she didn't even raise her voice. What is she? What did she used to be? No one had answers, not yet, but suspicion traveled faster than truth. Soldiers lined up for coffee, mechanics replaced tires, medics prepared kits, everyone passed fragments of the tale along like something fragile and dangerous. She didn't brag, she didn't clarify, she didn't even change her routine. She just returned to the signal's bay, checked her frequencies, and continued her day. But Maddox, he wasn't done. He couldn't be. For men like him, humiliation burns hotter than anger. It lingers, it festers, it demands redemption. And deep inside, he convinced himself that Claire had set him up. Him, a decorated Marine, tricked by a 5'0" Navy chief. The humiliation twisted into something dark and sharp. By noon the next day, he took his rage to the one place he believed still favored him. The chain of command. At 1400 hours, a hearing was called. Word spread like fire. Soldiers filled hallways whispering theories. The conference room filled with officers and enlisted personnel, a setting too formal for gossip, too heavy for speculation. Maddox arrived wearing a pressed uniform, jaw tight, eyes cold. Ray's and Dunn walked behind him, their expressions rehearsed. Their story was rehearsed too. But Claire, she walked in with her usual calm, hands folded, uniform immaculate, expression unreadable. As though she wasn't about to be accused of assaulting 3 Marines. As though she hadn't been pushed, cornered, mocked, and shoved. As though she already knew how the truth would unfold. Because truth, like silence, was something she never mishandled. She took her seat. Commander Bray sat beside her. Colonel Nathan Hale sat at the head of the table, posture rigid, eyes sharp enough to cut. When he called the room to order, even the air seemed to brace for impact. And in the quiet that followed, there was a final lingering question hovering over every single person in that room. What would happen when a bully's lies collided with a quiet warrior's truth? How do you lie in front of a room full of people when you've already convinced yourself the truth can't touch you? And what does a bully sound like when he finally realizes he's standing on a trap he built himself? The hearing room was too quiet, too tense, the kind of quiet that presses against your ears and makes you feel the weight of every breath. Panels of dark wood gave the space a courtroom solemnity, not the usual chaotic military energy Falcon Ridge was used to. Colonel Nathan Hale sat at the head of the long table, posture rigid, jaw carved from years of discipline. When he spoke, the air tightened. "Gunnery Sergeant Maddox," he said, "you requested this hearing, you may begin." Maddox rose slowly, smoothing his uniform as though arranging the surface could fix the cracks underneath. He cleared his throat with a dramatic pause, one meant to gather sympathy, to command the room, to shape the narrative. "Sir," he began, "we're here because last night, Chief Donovan attacked me and my men without provocation. We were conducting an equipment check in the maintenance wing when she, well, snapped." That last word was chosen carefully. A performance. He wanted the image of a hysterical, unstable woman to bloom in the minds of his audience. Reyes nodded, clutching his injured arm. Dunn looked at the floor like he was trying to recall lines he'd memorized. "We tried to de-escalate," Maddox continued, "but she was out of control, sir, violent." The last word echoed. Across the table, Claire sat perfectly still, hands folded, eyes steady, not tense, not offended, not even uncomfortable, just present. Colonel Hale turned to her. "Chief Donovan, your response." Claire raised one hand and rested it lightly on the folder in front of her. "My report is complete, sir." She didn't offer excuses, didn't argue, didn't defend herself. She simply spoke with a calm that immediately made Maddox shift in his seat. Commander Bray leaned forward. "With your permission," he said to Hale, "JAG will present the evidence." Hale gave a single nod. The JAG officer stood, middle-aged, methodical, wearing thin wire-rimmed glasses that made him look more like a professor than a lawyer. He picked up a remote from the table and walked to the monitor. "First exhibit," he said. The screen flickered to life. The dining facility footage filled the room, Maddox towering over Claire, his insults louder than the clatter of trays. The slap, her food scattering across the floor. Claire didn't flinch in the video. She didn't show anger. She didn't even look embarrassed. She just stood, closed her tablet, and walked away with dignity. The room shifted, a quiet, uncomfortable shift. Maddox looked down, Reyes swallowed, Dunn blinked rapidly. But JAG wasn't finished. "Second exhibit." He clicked again. The maintenance corridor appeared, grainy, narrow metal walls, Claire standing calm, three men closing in, Maddox's shove slamming her against the wall. Then physics. The pivot. The wrist lock. Reyes' arm going dead. Dunn crashing under redirected force. 9 seconds of controlled skill, not violence. Mastery. The footage ended. The silence that followed wasn't just quiet, it was judgment tightening like a noose. Hale leaned back, studying Claire with an expression that was not surprise, but recognition. The kind of recognition that comes from someone who has seen operators move like that in places people don't come back from. Finally, he spoke. "Chief Donovan," he said, voice deep and deliberate, "where did you learn control like that?" Claire lifted her gaze. Her voice was soft but unwavering. "Sir, I learned what was necessary to keep people alive. Nothing more, nothing less." That answer landed harder than any accusation Maddox could conjure. Hale let the weight of her words hang between them before he continued. This hearing is adjourned until 800 formation. A decision will be delivered then. No one spoke as chairs scraped and officers stood. Maddox tried to keep his posture straight, but the tremor in his jaw betrayed him. Reyes kept his eyes down. Dunn looked pale. Claire gathered her folder, not hurried, not hesitant. Just finished. As she stepped out of the room, whispers followed her through the hallway, quiet, stunned, uncertain. Not mocking this time, not dismissive. Curious. Respectful. Afraid to assume anything anymore. Outside, sunlight splashed across the base in sharp angles. Soldiers moved through their routines, unaware that tomorrow morning would shift the ground under their feet. Claire walked her usual route back to the signals bay. Her breathing remained steady. Her pulse didn't spike. Her shoulders didn't tense. But inside, beneath all that practiced calm, something stirred, an emotion she didn't often allow herself. Not relief. Not fear. Not pride. Sadness. Because none of this had been about proving herself. Not once. She had no desire to be respected, admired, feared, or understood. She didn't care what rumors people whispered about her. She didn't need recognition or status or validation. She wanted only one thing: to do her job, to keep people safe, to avoid hurting anyone unless she had no other choice. And she had given Maddox so many chances to turn away, to stop, to leave her alone. He never took them. She felt no triumph in proving him wrong, no satisfaction in the way the room shifted after watching the footage. She felt grief. Grief that grown men would rather destroy a quiet sailor than examine their own insecurities. Grief that restraint was mistaken for weakness. Grief that doing the right thing sometimes felt exactly like losing a piece of yourself. In the signals bay, Claire sat down at her workstation. The monitors glowed softly against her calm features. Radios murmured. Data scrolled. The network pulse steadied under her fingertips. Everything felt the same. Except it was. The weight of tomorrow pressed quietly at the back of her mind. The base would change. People would see her differently. Some would respect her. Some would avoid her. Some would pretend nothing happened. And Maddox would feel the consequences tomorrow in front of hundreds of watching eyes. Claire didn't wish him pain. She didn't wish him humiliation. She didn't wish anything at all. Because wishing wasn't part of her discipline. She simply accepted what was coming, the same way she accepted every storm she'd ever weathered, quietly, steadily, without anticipation or dread. That night, long after the radios fell quiet and most of the base had turned in, she sat alone in her small quarters. She didn't open her encrypted log. She didn't review footage. She didn't think about the hearing. She simply sat with her hands folded in her lap, staring at the wall. And the one question she allowed herself, the one that slipped past the silence she normally held like a shield, was softer than anything she'd ever let surface. Why did it always have to come to this? Not anger, not bitterness, just a quiet ache. The ache of someone who knew exactly how to defend herself, but wished she didn't have to. Tomorrow would come. The truth would rise. And Maddox would face the consequences he earned. But Claire would walk into that formation like she walked into everything. Calm, silent, steady, a storm no one noticed. Until it was far too late. What does justice sound like when it finally arrives? Is it loud, like a slammed gavel, or is it quiet, like hundreds of soldiers holding their breath at once? And what does a bully look like in front of the truth he tried to bury? By sunrise, Falcon Ridge felt different. The air wasn't heavier, but people walked with attention under their steps. Conversations hushed when doors opened. Soldiers gathered in knots near the motor pool, outside the gym, in the hallways, every group trading fragments of rumors they weren't supposed to know. Formation at 800. Base wide. Something big's happening. Has to do with the hearing, right? No way they'd call everyone over that. You haven't seen the footage then. Claire Donovan stood at the rear of the Navy detachment, exactly where she always stood. Nothing in her posture betrayed emotion, not anticipation, not worry, not relief. Just stillness. Her uniform was immaculate, boots polished, hair tight and neat, hands folded gently behind her back. She didn't fidget, didn't shift, didn't glance around to gauge reactions. If anyone had looked closely at her face, they might have seen a flicker of something soft, not pride, not fear, but acceptance. This moment wasn't what she wanted, but it was what the truth required. The courtyard filled quickly. Marines snapped into formation with crisp precision. Soldiers aligned their rows. Even the contractors stopped work and stood at the edges of the crowd. Hundreds of eyes. Hundreds of breaths held. Hundreds of people waiting for someone to tell them what the silence meant. At exactly 800, Colonel Nathan Hale marched onto the raised platform. His presence alone straightened every spine in the field. At ease, he commanded. Boots shifted, shoulders lowered, head stayed forward. Hale looked over the formation with a slow, sweeping gaze, a man measuring the weight of what he was about to say. In this uniform, he began, voice carrying across the open field, we uphold honor, discipline, and respect. The words struck like hammer blows. No dramatics, just truth. When those standards fail, he continued, when those who wear these ranks betray them, we correct it immediately, publicly, and completely. A ripple moved through the ranks, quiet, small, electric. Hale's next words came heavy. Last night, evidence was presented to this command. Evidence of misconduct, harassment, abuse of authority, and a deliberate attempt to conceal the truth. Eyes shifted, every head turning, slowly, painfully, toward the front of the Marine formation. Maddox raised, done. All three stood frozen. Maddox's jaw clenched so tight the muscle ticked along the side. Ray's stared straight ahead, face pale. Dunn looked sick, like he already knew the ground beneath him was about to collapse. Effective immediately, Hale declared. Gunnery Sergeant Cole Maddox is reduced in rank to Staff Sergeant. Gasps cracked through the formation like sparks. Corporal Rays and Corporal Dunn are reduced to Lance Corporal. A shockwave rippled outward. Some soldiers inhaled sharply. Some blinked in disbelief. Some stared at the three men with a mixture of sympathy and grim understanding. This wasn't discipline. This was a fall. All three, Hale continued, will forfeit 1 month's pay and are reassigned away from leadership positions pending further review. None of the three moved. Maddox's face was rigid stone, rage, humiliation, disbelief, all held back by the smallest thread of military bearing. Hale wasn't finished. And now, he said, voice lowering into something deeper, we address the final piece. He turned his head slightly. Chief Petty Officer Claire Donovan, front and center. Claire stepped forward from the Navy formation with quiet precision. One measured step after another, boots hitting concrete like a steady heartbeat. She didn't look around as she walked. She didn't absorb the whispers or the looks or the sudden swell of respect radiating from the crowd. She kept her gaze forward, her breathing even. She stopped 2 paces from Hale and rendered a crisp salute. He returned it. Then he faced her fully, voice carrying across hundreds of watching service members. Chief Donovan, he said, on behalf of this base, this command, and the United States Marine Corps, I offer you a formal apology. Silence fell across Falcon Ridge, not shocked silence, not uncomfortable silence. Reverent silence. You showed restraint when others showed aggression, Hale continued. Professionalism when others chose arrogance. strength when others displayed weakness. Claire didn't bow her head, didn't smile, didn't shift. She simply listened. Because that's what true discipline looks like. Hale then turned sharply toward Maddox. "Staff Sergeant Maddox," he ordered, "step forward." Maddox obeyed, jaw locked, eyes burning with humiliation. Hale's next command carved itself into the memory of every person present. "You will salute Chief Donovan." A collective inhale rippled through the formation. Maddox didn't move for half a second, but it wasn't defiance. It was disbelief. He had mocked her, belittled her, cornered her, tried to break her. And now he stood inches away from being ordered to show her the respect he had arrogantly withheld. Finally, with a jaw so tight it seemed ready to crack, he lifted his hand, fingers aligned, palm angled, a perfect salute, military sharp, emotionally hollow. Claire looked at him. Not with triumph, not with vengeance, not even with forgiveness. Just quiet acknowledgement. She lifted her hand and returned the salute. And in that moment, the entire base understood something they had ignored for weeks. Silence wasn't weakness. Restraint wasn't fear. And the quietest person in the room had been the strongest all along. When Claire lowered her hand, the formation stayed silent, not because they didn't know what to do, but because respect, real respect, makes you still. Hale concluded the ceremony with one final truth. Let this be a reminder: strength is not loud, respect is not optional, and quiet warriors walk among us every day. The formation held its breath. Then, dismissed. Rows dissolved. Conversations sparked back to life. The courtyard slowly filled with whispers, soft, stunned, humbled. But no one approached Claire. Not yet. They didn't know how to. Claire turned, walked back through the dispersing crowd, and returned to the signals bay as if nothing had changed. She didn't bask in the attention. She didn't look for gratitude. She didn't seek validation. She just returned to work. Because the truth wasn't about proving who she was. It was about correcting what had gone wrong. And she had done that, with silence, discipline, and 9 seconds of control. Why didn't she celebrate? Why didn't she smile or breathe deeper, or let even one flicker of satisfaction show on her face? Most people, after walking through humiliation, confrontation, and public vindication, would feel something: relief, pride, release. But Claire Donovan was most people. And the base learned that quickly. After the ceremony, the formation dissolved into clusters of whispers. Men and women exchanged looks, some apologetic, some stunned, some quietly ashamed. But no one approached Claire immediately. Respect can be loud in a crowd. But personal respect is always quiet at first. Inside the dim glow of the operations center, monitors hummed. Radio chatter rolled through the room like layered threads of energy. Claire walked in as if stepping into any other day. As if she hadn't just left a parade ground where a Marine was ordered to salute her. As if hundreds of people hadn't watched the truth unfold. As if she hadn't become the center of a story she never wanted to tell. When she stepped through the doorway, conversations didn't stop, they softened. A few heads turned, others straightened instinctively. Not out of fear, out of realization. The kind that makes people see you, really see you for the first time. She walked to her workstation, set down her tablet, signed into the system, and began adjusting frequencies just as she had every day before. No rush, no hesitation. Just presence. A young private lingered near her desk, shifting his weight like he wanted to speak but didn't know how. He looked barely 19, elbows still too sharp for his sleeves. Finally, he cleared his throat. "Chief, thank you for what you did." Claire lifted her gaze. There was no pride in his eyes, no flattery, just gratitude, a simple human truth he'd needed to say out loud. She nodded once, calm, steady, gentle. The nod wasn't a dismissal, it was permission. He exhaled, as if releasing guilt he didn't know he'd been carrying. Commander Bray approached next, older, composed, a man who picked his words with care. He stood silently until Claire finished typing a line of code. When she finally looked up, he said, "The base is better today because of you." Claire didn't blink, didn't soften, didn't bask in the praise. She only replied, correction was needed. Bray nodded, not because the words were profound, but because they were true, and because he knew she wasn't being humble. She was being exact. After he walked away, Claire slipped on her headset and continued her day, adjusted spectrum drift, handled 2 static bursts, monitored convoy check-ins, issued a weather band warning, corrected an interference pattern in record time. To anyone walking in without context, she looked like a quiet woman dedicated to her work. But those who had seen the footage, those who had witnessed the humiliation, those who had heard Hale's words echo across the formation, they understood something new. Her silence had never been passive. It had been discipline. And her calm wasn't detachment. It was command. Hours passed, morning faded into afternoon, afternoon leaned toward dusk. And Claire remained steady, untouched by gossip, untouched by vindication. But something had changed. Not in her. In them. People glanced at her differently. Not with caution, not with fear, but with a soft, unsure respect. The kind that grows slow, like a bruise from a truth finally absorbed. Nobody wanted to crowd her. Nobody dared ask about her past. Nobody approached her with curiosity that crossed into intrusion. Because her silence didn't feel mysterious anymore. It felt earned. By late afternoon, the operations center cooled with the coming evening. Soldiers filtered in and out. Radios pulsed softly. A storm rolled far off on the horizon, bending the airwaves just enough to keep her hands busy. She welcomed the quiet. But the base wasn't finished with its shift. At 1700, Claire packed her tablet and stood to leave. Her steps were steady as always. She could have walked this path blindfolded. Out of the bay, past the supply office, around the corner where the water coolers sat in their usual awkward alignment, and toward the barracks. But before she reached the door, she heard someone behind her. "Chief." The voice was hesitant. Claire turned. A staff sergeant stood near the doorway, shifting uncomfortably. He wasn't part of her chain of command. He wasn't part of the harassment. He wasn't even someone she spoke to often. But he looked impacted. He cleared his throat. "I should have stepped in back then in the chow hall." Claire studied him quietly. She didn't let him drown in guilt. She didn't let him ramble. She didn't punish him with silence. "It's done," she said softly. He blinked. "I just wish I had." "It's done," she repeated, not unkindly. "Go do better tomorrow." He nodded twice, quickly, then walked away without looking back. Claire stepped into the hallway and continued her route. Not proudly. Not triumphantly. Just steadily. Later that night, in the stillness of her quarters, she sat on the edge of her neatly made bed. The room smelled faintly of chlorine and cold air. Her early morning swims always left a whisper behind. She stared at the single mug on her metal desk. Her hands rested on her knees. Today had been heavy. Important. Necessary. But not comforting. Just as often was. She thought of Maddox, not with bitterness but with a strange, distant pity. Not for what he'd lost today, but for what had driven him to this point. Men like him weren't born bullies. They were shaped by their own battles, their own fears, their own need to feel tall in rooms where they felt invisible. She understood invisibility. She never needed to escape it. He did. That was the difference. Her eyes drifted toward the small drawer in her nightstand. Inside was the folded cloth patch she never wore. Its trident edge was faded by salt water, the stitching softened by time. She didn't reach for it. She didn't need to. Not anymore. Without unfolding it, she could feel the memory behind it. The missions, the losses, the training, the silence she had learned to carry. But she didn't open the drawer. She simply breathed. Deeper. Slow. Controlled. The same way she had breathed through grief years ago. The same way she had breathed in the maintenance corridor. The same way she had breathed today, when the base finally saw her clearly. She lay back slowly, eyes on the dim ceiling. Tomorrow would be normal again. Or close enough. The radios would crackle. The interference would drift. The frequencies would shift. The storms would come and go. And she would be there, steady as ever, keeping people alive from behind the scenes. Quietly, humbly, exactly the way she preferred. Because the truth was simple. Respect wasn't the reward she sought. Peace was. And maybe, just maybe, after today she was a little closer to earning it. What happens after the storm passes? When justice is done, apologies spoken, ranks stripped, and the world goes quiet again. What fills the silence that's left behind? Some people feel relief. Some feel pride. Some feel vindicated. Claire Donovan felt none of those. Instead, she felt something much simpler, much quieter. She felt the weight lift. And the echo remain. The morning after the ceremony rose calm and pale. A thin mist clung to the edges of Falcon Ridge, softening the hard lines of concrete barriers and turning the razor wire into silhouettes against the still silver sky. Claire walked to the indoor pool before dawn, towel slung over one shoulder. She moved through the empty complex with the same unhurried steps she used everywhere, steps that never announced her but always centered her. She reached the water, knelt, and pressed her palms against the cold tile. Then she slipped into the pool. The water closed over her like a shroud. She exhaled long and slow, sinking to the bottom until her knees touched tile. Down there in the quiet cold, the world softened. No noise, no whispered rumors, no lingering looks, just stillness. She let her breath drift out in tiny silver strings of bubbles. For a few seconds, she closed her eyes. Not to escape. To reset. To return to the version of herself that existed long before Maddox, long before the base learned who she was, long before people tried to draw conclusions she had spent a lifetime avoiding. When she finally resurfaced, she didn't gasp. She didn't blink hard. She simply inhaled once, clean and controlled. The world was waiting again. Later in the signals bay, the shift rotation buzzed with its usual hectic rhythm. Radios chirped. Weather reports blipped. A storm cell drifted faintly on the spectrum, noisy but harmless. Claire sat at her workstation, fingers dancing across keys in a quiet choreography. Soldiers came and went. Some offered small nods, subtle gestures. A few quiet mornings, Chief, spoken with new sincerity. No one spoke of yesterday directly, not out of avoidance but out of respect. They weren't afraid of her. They were recalibrating, seeing her without the distortions of rumor or bias. Midway through her shift, a soft knock tapped her desk. She looked up. It was the young private from the day before, the one who had thanked her. He looked nervous again. Chief, Colonel Hale wants to see you, in Ops Conference Room 2. Claire closed her tablet. Thank you. The walk there felt familiar. Not tense, not heavy. Just another corridor, another destination, another moment she would approach with composure. She stepped inside and found Hale standing near the window, hands behind his back, watching the horizon where a dust storm brewed faintly. Chief Donovan, he said without turning, take a seat. She did. Hale faced her, expression carved with something deeper than authority. reflection, resolve, maybe even regret. You didn't just endure misconduct, he began. You showed remarkable restraint, professionalism, control. That's not common. Claire stayed silent, not out of fear or humility, but because she believed truth didn't need embellishment. Hale studied her. You've seen things, he said quietly. Real things, the kind that don't leave your posture or your breathing or your eyes. Her gaze didn't shift. He wasn't interrogating her. He was acknowledging her. Whatever your past assignments were, he continued, whoever you served with, I understand that's your business. But I want you to know this. What you did here changed this base. She said nothing for a moment, then replied softly, I didn't want to change anything, sir. I know, Hale said, that's why it mattered. He dismissed her gently, and Claire left with the same quiet she entered with. Outside, the base felt lighter not for her but around her. People weren't whispering anymore. They weren't gawking. They weren't second-guessing. They were adjusting. And sometimes adjusting looks a lot like respect. Still, the day wasn't over. Around 14:30, a message hit the radio net, a convoy request, simple at first, then destabilized by interference. Claire leaned closer, adjusting gain. The signal split. Static, then clarity, then static again. She frowned for the first time in hours. Atmospheric distortion, a tech asked. No, Claire said softly, something else. She shifted bands, isolating the disruption. The pattern didn't match weather, didn't match distance, didn't match equipment failure. It matched intentional jamming. Weak, primitive, but deliberate. She marked the signature, logged it, and sent a quiet alert to the watch desk. The tech beside her glanced over. Everything okay, Chief? Claire didn't answer right away. Her breathing stayed calm, but her mind sharpened, like a blade flexing after long rest. There's activity near Ridge 42, she said finally. Nothing large, but something trying to mask small movements. The tech blinked. Enemy. Claire didn't speculate. She only dealt in the truth she could measure. It's interference, she said, worth monitoring. But beneath the surface, a thought stirred. This wasn't random. Not today. Not after the commotion on base. Not after Maddox's punishment. Not after the public humiliation that might have shifted power dynamics in ways no one accounted for yet. People weren't the only ones watching Falcon Ridge. Sometimes enemies listened too. She flagged the interference again, then another anomaly. Barely a flicker, barely a scratch on the spectrum. But to her, patterns were conversations. Something was speaking. Quietly, cautiously, testing the perimeter. By 1600 hours, she had narrowed it down to a directional band used for short-range communication, rarely used by local shepherds, sometimes used by smugglers, and always used by enemy spotters. Claire documented everything swiftly. Not with panic, not with fear, with precision, because she knew what came next. Threats don't announce themselves loudly. They whisper first. They test your silence. They see whether you respond. And Claire always responded. By late evening, she stepped out of the comms bay, mind quiet but focused. The sun dipped low behind the ridge, throwing long shadows across the base. Then she felt it. A presence behind her. Not hostile, just uncertain. She turned. Dunn stood there alone. The man who had cornered her, laughed at her, participated in every moment Maddox engineered. But the guilt on his face told a different story now. Chief, his voice cracked. Can I talk to you? Claire didn't move toward him. She didn't step back either. Yes, she said. Dunn swallowed. His hands trembled slightly at his sides. I'm sorry, he whispered. I was stupid. I followed Maddox because that's what I do, I follow, and it was wrong, all of it. Claire studied him, not coldly, not kindly, just truthfully. Why are you telling me this? She asked. He looked at the ground. Because I can't sleep. Because I keep seeing how calm you were. How you didn't hurt us. You could have, you didn't. Claire let his words settle. Then she answered with quiet clarity. Done, correction isn't punishment. It's direction, use it. He blinked hard, then nodded. A single tear slipped from the corner of his eye, but he wiped it away quickly. She didn't judge him. She simply walked past him, leaving him with the truth he'd been too afraid to face alone. The night cooled as she crossed the courtyard. The sky deepened into indigo. The generators hummed. But Claire's mind stayed on the interference signal, on the flicker in the band, on the whisper across the spectrum, on the truth she felt but couldn't yet prove. Something outside the wire was paying attention, and soon the base would have to. But for now, she simply walked back to her quarters. Quiet, steady, calm. A storm watching another storm forming just beyond the horizon. What happens when silence meets danger? When a woman who never wanted attention suddenly becomes the only person who can sense what's coming? Most people ignore small signals. Most people overlook whispers in the chaos. Claire Donovan never did. She learned long ago that trouble rarely arrives with noise. It arrives with patterns, with distortions, with the quietest shift in the world that only those who have suffered enough learn to feel. And tonight something was shifting. The desert wind carried a strange tension, thin, sharp, unsettling. The sky was moonless, a dark curtain stretching across the base. Far off beyond Ridge 42, a faint glimmer of movement flickered, barely visible, barely noticeable. But Claire noticed. At 200 hours, she sat alone in the signal's bay, head tilted slightly, listening not just to sound, but to absence. The radios whispered at different pitches. The spectrum pulses blinked out data like faint heartbeats. One of them skipped. Just once. Just faintly. But to someone like Claire, that was enough. She leaned forward, adjusting the frequency by a quarter of a hertz. The signal sharpened, revealing the ghost of a transmission, thin, intermittent, cautious. Someone out there was coordinating. Not loudly, not confidently, but deliberately. The night tech wandered by with a mug of coffee. "Chief, you need anything?" "No," Claire said softly, because she didn't want to explain something she couldn't yet prove. She logged the activity, slid on her headset, and followed the signal with the patience of someone who understood shadows far better than light. The distortion moved. Slowly, purposefully, closer. Her breath steadied. She tapped into the base's perimeter channel and spoke in a level tone. "Ops, this is Signals. Be advised, possible low-level interference east side Ridge 42. Nature unknown. Request passive monitoring." Ops replied, "Copy. Signals, will keep an eye." But she knew they wouldn't understand, not fully, not yet. A few minutes later, the signal pulsed again, twice this time. Stronger, like someone adjusting a radio while whispering into it. She isolated the direction. Northeast quadrant. Near the dead well. A common meeting point for smugglers. A perfect staging point for scouts. She narrowed the frequency again and listened. Static. Then breath. Then a faint click. Then another voice, distorted, like sand dragging across metal. Foreign. Not local dialect. Cold. Cautious. She hit the alarm. Not the loud one. Not the one that triggers panic. The quiet one that wakes the chain of command, without sending the base into frenzy. Minutes later, Colonel Hale walked in, boots silent, expression carved with urgency. Behind him, 2 Marines and Commander Bray entered quickly. "Talk to me, Chief," Hale said. Claire pointed at the screen. Intermittent directional signal, not weather, not civilian. Coordinated movement near Ridge 42. Small team, possibly marking targets. Hale studied her face, then the data. How sure? Claire held his gaze, sure enough to move. No doubts. No hesitations. No fear. Just conviction. Hale nodded sharply. Send the QRF quietly, no lights. Orders snapped across radios in coded bursts. Within minutes, a small quick reaction force rolled out under blackout conditions. No headlights, no signals, just the glow of night vision cutting softly across the ground. Claire stayed on the comm. Listening. Tracking. Breathing. Grounded. The QRF reached the ridge. Their commander spoke softly into the line. "Ops, this is Viper team. We have tracks, multiple, fresh." Claire leaned in. "Movement northeast," she whispered into the channel. "Shift 30 meters, slow. They're trying to break visual." Viper team adjusted. Moments later. Contact, 2 tangos fleeing. Radio crackle. Footsteps pounding dirt. Short controlled shouts. Then, 3 detained, 1 injured. They were mapping our east perimeter. Hale exhaled quietly. Bray whispered, if she hadn't caught that. He didn't finish. They all knew the truth. The reconnaissance team hadn't come to fight. Not yet. They had come to measure. To test. To prepare. To find weaknesses. And if Claire hadn't heard the whisper in the noise, Falcon Ridge would have been blindsided soon. Hard. Vast. Quiet. The detainees were taken in, weapons seized, radios analyzed, and every single piece of equipment matched known enemy scouts in the region. Claire logged the report and finally removed her headset. Her shoulders didn't shake. Her breathing didn't quicken. Her hands didn't tremble. She just sat quietly for a moment, absorbing the weight of the night. Hale stepped toward her, voice lower than before. "Chief, you didn't just prevent a scouting op. You prevented what would have come after." He paused. "You kept this base alive again." Claire met his eyes, calm and steady. "I did my job, sir." He shook his head. "You did far more than that." But she didn't absorb the praise. She didn't need to. By sunrise, word spread softly, not loudly like the Maddox hearing, but in the quiet way truth travels among people who know what danger looks like. Signals caught it. Chief Donovan heard something no one else caught. She saved the perimeter. She's something else. But Claire never acknowledged the murmurs. At noon, she walked to the Chow Hall. People parted without meaning to, not out of fear. Out of respect. Real respect. The kind no rank can demand. The kind only character can earn. A young Marine, nervous, respectful, stood up as she passed. "Chief, seat's open if you want it." Claire nodded once. "Thank you, but I'm fine." He smiled, not offended, honored almost. She ate alone quietly. Not isolated. Just herself. After chow, Dunn approached her near the exit. He wore humility like a physical weight, but something in his eyes looked steadier than before. "Chief," he said softly, "I heard what happened last night. You really saved us." Claire held his gaze. Everyone deserves safety. Dunn swallowed, even people who messed up. Claire softened just slightly, especially people who learned from it. His throat tightened. "Thank you." She nodded. "Stay on the right path." He walked away, shoulders lighter. By evening, the base returned to its rhythm, unaware of how close danger had crept. Claire finished her shift, gathered her things, and stepped outside into the fatting gold of sunset. The air smelled of sand and cooling metal. Wind brushed her cheek gently. She walked back to her quarters silently, not as a hero, not as a symbol, not as the woman the bass now whispered about, just as Claire, quiet, steady, grounded, but something inside her felt different. Not pride, not validation, something deeper, the understanding that the world finally saw her clearly, and the recognition that she didn't need acknowledgement to be whole. She sat on her bunk, boots still on, staring at the patch in her drawer, the trident she never displayed. Not out of secrecy, not out of shame, but because who she had been then, and who she chose to be now, were two different things. She didn't need the world to know her past. She only needed to live the truth of her present. As she lay back on her pillow, eyes closing slowly, a final thought drifted through her mind, soft, quiet, and honest. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. And that, she knew, was enough.